Some he could not forgive for the betrayals that hurt him too deeply. Others he looked on with envy, seeing how fame and fortune seemed to fall from the sky, and a few caused him unease. Men whose power, influence or hidden words could shake even Mexico's most beloved idol. In those final days, Pedro Infante lifted the curtain on the grudges he carried, and what came to light was shocking. 6 names that no one imagined he would dare to reveal. Miguel Alemán. Whispers of murder after the accident. In the golden age of Mexican cinema, power did not belong only to actors or directors, it was also woven into the hands of politicians. And no politician had more influence over cinema in the late 1940s and early 1950s than President Miguel Alemán Valdez. A man with Hollywood ambitions for Mexico, Alemán cultivated friendships with the brightest stars of the screen, Jorge Negrete, Cantinflas, Maria Felix, but one relationship was always covered in shadows. His bond with Pedro Infante, the people's idol. For decades, rumors circulated like vultures. Some say that Alemán adored Infante, others insist that he despised him. Some whisper that he even ordered his death. The truth is that their relationship was never simple. It was respect mixed with manipulation, gratitude seasoned with bitterness. By the late 1940s, Pedro Infante had already conquered Mexico with his voice and charisma. He was not the product of conservatories or elite families. He was the son of a mechanic from Sinaloa. That authenticity excited the people, but it made the ruling class uncomfortable. Alemán, the first civilian president after decades of military command, wanted to modernize Mexico. For him, cinema was a tool for propaganda and prestige. When director Ismael Rodriguez dreamed of reuniting Infante with Jorge Negrete in the same film, both actors refused. They admired each other, yes, but they feared direct comparison. For years, the producers failed to convince them. It was only when Alemán himself sent personal letters, one to Pedro, the other to Jorge. The miracle happened. His message was simple but powerful. Mexico needed them together for the glory of national cinema. The result was Two Kinds of Care, one of the most iconic films of its time, but behind the applause lurked resentment. Pedro knew he accepted not because he wanted to, but because the president's hand had forced it. Publicly, Alemán seemed like an ally. He wrote letters praising Pedro as a distinguished Sinaloan artist. He even ordered governors to support Infante's charitable works, such as his efforts to build a school in Guamuchil. He assigned him bodyguards for protection and attended his premieres, but privately, Infante felt trapped. Friends later recalled that he felt Alemán treated him less like a colleague and more like a pawn. Someone to hold up as proof that the president controlled not only politics but also culture. The balance between gratitude and resentment weighed too heavily. Pedro once told Confidants, "Do you help me? Yes, but do you help me so that I never forget who has the power?" Tensions escalated as politics and romance collided. Infante's name was linked to Christian Martel, Miss Universe 1953. Young and stunning, she soon became romantically involved with Miguel Alemán Velasco, the president's son. Gossip columns whispered that Infante and Martel were more than friends, meeting in secret. Some even claimed that she became pregnant with Pedro's child and was later forced to have an abortion by the powerful Alemán family. Although never proven, this rumor became fuel for the fire. For Alemán, already jealous of his son's reputation and his own legacy, Infante's closeness to Martel was seen as treason. To Pedro, the president's meddling in his personal life was intolerable. In public, they smiled. In private, Infante seethed with rage. Pedro Infante's tragic plane crash on April 15, 1957, shook Mexico to its core. Officially it was an accident, but the whispers never died down. Why was a man with so many enemies in high places flying such a precarious plane? Why did Aleman's name come up in barroom rumors as the man who wanted him silenced? Some imitators and relatives went further, insisting that Infante faked his death to escape Aleman's wrath. One version claimed that the president had him killed out of jealousy, for Martel, for Sarah Montiel, for his indomitable popularity. Fantasy or truth? The legend survived because the conflict between Pedro and Aleman was always half-spoken, half-shadowed. The tragedy of their relationship lay in its contradictions. Aleman undoubtedly fostered Infante's career, forcing two kinds of care, granting him favors, even protecting him at times. But Pedro, proud and deeply connected to the people, detested the idea of being controlled. He would tell his friends, "I sing for the people, not for the pines." To him, Aleman represented the arrogance of the elite he had fled his entire life. When he accepted the president's demands, it wasn't loyalty, it was survival. He couldn't risk open rebellion against the most powerful man in Mexico. But deep down, Infante hated the feeling of debt, he hated being seen as someone's puppet, and above all, he hated that his art, his songs, his films were being used as tools of someone else's power. Luis Aguilar, the friendship that never was. In the golden age of Mexican cinema, few films captured the national imagination like A Toda Machina. On screen, Pedro Infante and Luis Aguilar seemed like inseparable brothers, partners, rivals, and friends in the story of two motorcycle cops navigating life and love in Mexico City. Their chemistry was so convincing that audiences assumed the actors shared the same bond off camera. The truth was much colder. Pedro Infante and Luis Aguilar were never friends, just colleagues united by contract and circumstance. Director Ismael Rodriguez knew the risk in pairing two stars. Pedro Infante was already the town's idol, the man who could steal every scene with his charisma, humor, and voice. Luis Aguilar, the Rooster Gyro, was a talented actor and singer in his own right, but a step below Infante in fame. Rodriguez's challenge was to balance them, to prevent one from overshadowing the other, and he succeeded. On screen, Pedro Chavez and Luis Macias were equal parts, joking around, racing each other on motorcycles, and singing duets that melted the hearts of the audience. The success was enormous, leading to the sequel, You've Got That Woman, where behind the camera the story was very different. Luis Aguilar deeply admired Pedro Infante. He never spoke badly of him and later admitted that he respected his talents as both an actor and a singer. However, admiration was not enough to force a friendship. Pedro kept his distance, not rudely, but firmly. While Aguilar socialized with the cast and crew, Pedro preferred solitude. During breaks, he would climb aboard one of the Harley-Davidsons used in filming and roar through the streets of Mexico City alone. Other times, he would eat in silence in his dressing room or spend time with the technical staff instead of his fellow actors. He was polite, even cordial when the conversation called for it, but he never invited closeness. For Aguilar, this was an impossible wall to scale. Despite spending months together on set, their relationship remained professional, with no camaraderie, no private jokes, no off-camera bonds that matched the fictional brotherhood. Why the distance? Some say that Pedro Infante was afraid of getting too close to his rivals, that friendship might erase the competitive spark that kept him on top. Others argue that it was his character. Despite his image as a popular idol, Pedro was often a loner, burdened with personal struggles and insecurities that he preferred to face alone. In Aguilar's case, there was no open conflict, no insults, no bitterness, but there was no intimacy either. Pedro never let him in, and Aguilar, though disappointed, accepted him. Fernando Soler. The day the idol was humiliated. In 1949, Mexican cinema brought together two titans for the black sheep, the legendary Fernando Soler, already an accomplished maestro, and the rising idol Pedro Infante, adored by millions but still unsure of his place among the greats. What should have been a dream collaboration turned into one of the most humiliating moments of Infante's career, a clash of egos that fans still whisper about today. By then, Fernando Soler was untouchable, respected not only as an actor but also as the patriarch of the Soler dynasty, with a career that spanned theater, film, and leadership of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts. Pedro Infante, on the other hand, still saw himself as a simple carpenter with no acting training, as director Ismael Rodriguez would later recall. When he learned that he would play Silvano Trevino, the son of Soler's character, Pedro hesitated. The script called for his role to be submissive, mocked, slapped, and belittled by his father. For Infante, who had built his image as a proud and strong charro, the idea of being humiliated on screen by a giant like Soler was unbearable. He even considered abandoning the project, fearing that the audience would see him as weak. But Rodriguez insisted. He convinced Pedro that the film would mark a turning point in his career and that the audience would continue to love him, even in defeat. Against his own instincts, Infante accepted. The most infamous scene came at the dinner table. Silvano sits down with his mother, tired of his father's drunkenness. Suddenly, Cruz Trevino, played by Fernando Soler, staggers in, drunk and furious. "You'll always be the black sheep of this family." His wife berates him. Enraged, he demands food, insults her cooking, and then turns on his son. When Pedro's character dares to respond, Soler hits him, slaps him brutally across the face and shouts, "Go eat with the pigs." Humiliated, Silvano is thrown out of the room like a servant with his dignity shattered in front of his family. For the audience, the scene was electrifying, raw, powerful, unforgettable, but for Pedro Infante it meant something deeper. On that set he wasn't just acting, he was living his fear of being overshadowed and dominated by Soler. Behind the cameras, Pedro couldn't hide his discomfort. Friends said he resented the fact that Soler was paid the same as him and, even worse, that he had demanded the same level of credit. For the young star, who was at the height of his popularity at the time, sharing the spotlight with an older actor seemed like an insult. Infante also couldn't stand being portrayed as weak, especially in front of a man he secretly admired but also feared. Soler's natural authority on set, his commanding voice, his presence, only deepened Pedro's sense of inferiority. That resentment turned into tension. And although both were professionals, the discomfort never completely went away. For many who knew him, Pedro always carried a wound. Having been beaten and humiliated not just by a character, but by the living legend Fernando Soler, Joaquin Cordero. From admiration to disappointment. On the set of Pepe el Toro, a young actor named Joaquin Cordero went from Infante's admirer to his enemy. Their clash would leave scars and almost ended in tragedy. Before sharing a set with Infante, Joaquin Cordero was already his fan. He had been moved by Pedro's raw and emotional performance in You the Rich, particularly the unforgettable scene where Pepe mourns the death of his son. I thought he was humble, warm and authentic, Cordero later confessed. That's why when director Ismael Rodriguez offered him the role of Lalo Gallardo, Pepe's childhood friend in Pepe El Toro, Joaquin accepted without thinking twice. He approached Infante with genuine enthusiasm, saying, "Wow, I'm so happy and satisfied to be working with you because you're a great figure, you're a great person, you're a great actor, and for me it's a satisfaction and an honor to be with you." But the response destroyed his admiration. Pedro didn't look at him, didn't say a word, simply stood up, whistled nonchalantly and walked to the nearest window. For Cordero, that arrogance was the beginning of a bitter rivalry. The real breaking point came during the boxing scenes. Infante, who dreamed of being a boxer, threw himself into the role with too much intensity. His punches, even in rehearsals, were real and hard. Actors usually fake punches to avoid injury, but Pedro refused. Cordero warned him, "Relax, Pedro, if you hit me hard, I'm going to have to hit you back." Infante smirked and replied, "What, are you one-armed?" That one sentence was enough to ignite the fight. On set, in front of the cameras and crew, both actors began throwing real punches at each other. The choreographed fight turned into a violent brawl. Every punch Cordero threw was answered by Pedro with equal force. The crew panicked. This was no longer a movie, this was a real confrontation that could end very badly. What made the situation deadly was something everyone on set knew. Pedro Infante had a metal plate in his skull, the result of a motorcycle accident. A single miscalculated blow to the head could kill him instantly. Cordero realized the risk in the middle of the fight, although furious, he held back. He later admitted that if he had thrown a full-on punch to Infante's head, it could have been a tragedy. He confronted him again, telling him that he was not willing to take the fall for his death. Only then did Pedro tone down the intensity, and the two actors managed to finish the film without further violence. For Cordero, the incident revealed a side of Pedro Infante that audiences had never seen: proud, dismissive, even reckless. The admiration he once felt turned to disappointment. As he would say years later, "The man I knew was not the humble idol people imagined." But from Pedro's perspective, the resentment may have been mutual. He detested actors who questioned his methods or tried to limit his acting. He was the star, the king of the box office, and in his eyes no young man should be telling him how to act or how to fight. Infante may not have personally hated Joaquin Cordero, but he hated being challenged, especially by someone who refused to bow to his dominance. Despite the near disaster, the two men finished Pepe El Toro and delivered one of the most successful films of the era. To audiences, nothing seemed wrong. The fight in the ring looked like pure movie magic. Few knew that what they saw on screen was a real fight disguised as an act. In later interviews, Cordero softened his words. He admitted that he never stopped respecting Pedro's talent, but he could never forget the arrogance or the blows that almost killed him. For Pedro, the incident became just another rumor in a career full of controversy. For Joaquin Cordero, on the other hand, it was the day his hero became his rival. Jorge Negrete, the duel of couplets, were the two brightest stars of the golden age of Mexican cinema. Pedro Infante, the humble mechanic from Sinaloa who sang straight from the heart, and Jorge Negrete, the elegant singing charro trained in military school, fluent in several languages, with a voice that thundered like an orchestra. Together they embodied everything Mexico adored in its national heroes, but they also carried an invisible weight, comparisons, rivalries, and a duel of egos that became one of the most controversial relationships in the history of entertainment. From the beginning, the press portrayed them as polar opposites. Negrete, with his aristocratic bearing, was the official idol of Mexico, disciplined, imposing, cultured, the childish idol of the people, carefree, playful, and adored by the working class. Their careers grew side by side. In 1943, while Pedro was recording Nocturnal and Jorge was performing Mexico Lindo y Querido, radio listeners immediately began comparing them. Who was the true voice of Mexico? Each new release, each performance, each award fueled the attention. Privately, Pedro confessed to director Ismael Rodriguez, "Look at Jorge. He went to military school, he speaks 3 languages, he's taller, more handsome, and his voice is a torrent. And I have a little voice like a jet, he's going to make me disappear." Quote. It wasn't arrogance, it was insecurity. But insecurity has a way of turning into resentment. For years, producers tried to reunite them in a movie. Both refused. They feared that one would overshadow the other and that their careers and pride would suffer. Then came President Miguel Alemán Valdez, urging them to star in Ismael Rodriguez's project. 2 Kinds of Care. With the weight of the presidency behind them, neither Infante nor Negrete could refuse. The conditions were strict. Equal screen time, the same songs, equal importance in the story. Even the credits had to be carefully negotiated. For Pedro, who secretly considered Negrete his superior, it was torture disguised as flattery. He once asked Rodriguez to put Jorge's name first in the credits. "Without him, I wouldn't be here." But in his heart, Pedro felt cornered. On screen, their rivalry became legend. The duel of couplets in 2 Kinds of Care remains one of the most iconic moments in Mexican cinema. 2 charros hurling verses like daggers, mixing humor, insult, and pride, but behind the cameras the tension boiled. In rehearsals, Jorge criticized Pedro's playful style as undisciplined. Pedro would mock Jorge for being rigid and pretentious. According to crew members, their arguments sometimes ended in shoving, and more than once Rodriguez had to separate them. The audience adored him. They believed the rivalry was part of the show, but Pedro found the mockery deeply painful. He later confided in a friend, "He didn't just see me as competition, he saw me as an imitator." What made the conflict so dramatic was that beneath the hostility lay admiration. Pedro never managed to call him by his first name. He was always Don Jorge. He looked up to him, almost like a father figure. Negrete, for his part, defended Pedro within the actors' union, fighting for better contracts and recommending him for roles. But admiration has a cruel twin, envy. Pedro hated not being able to match Negrete's academic training, his imposing bearing, his respect among the elite. And Negrete, in turn, feared Pedro's unstoppable popularity among the masses. It wasn't pure hatred, it was the unbearable mirror that each held up to the other. When 2 Kinds of Care finally premiered in 1953, the public celebrated it as a triumph, but the rivalry ended abruptly just a month later, when Jorge Negrete died at age 42 from liver complications. Pedro Infante attended the funeral. Witnesses claimed that he placed white flowers on the coffin and whispered a song under his breath. Rumor later that he told a friend, "Now Mexico has only one charro." Relief and pain, mixed in equal parts. Wolf Rubinsky's, the rivalry in and out of the ring. Pedro Infante built his legend not only with his voice and charisma, but also with his devotion to the sport. He loved boxing, trained hard, and conducted himself like a true athlete. That passion became both a gift and a curse when fate brought him face to face with Wolf Rubinskis, the Latvian-born boxer, wrestler, and actor who arrived in Mexico in the 1940s and quickly transformed himself into one of cinema's favorite villains. Their showdown reached its climax in Pepe El Toro. On screen, Rubinskis played Bobby Galeana, the fighter who would face Infante's character in a brutal boxing match, but behind the scenes, tensions boiled over. Infante already had a titanium plate in his skull from a plane crash. Every punch filmed for the movie carried the real risk of tragedy. Rubinskis, an experienced boxer, knew how to control his fists, but Infante's pride kept him restless. He hated the idea of sharing the ring with someone who in real life was stronger, more disciplined, and far more experienced in combat. Friends of Infante later recounted that he despised Wolf because he felt humiliated. He was Mexico's idol, yet on set he seemed like the apprentice while Rubinskis acted like the true professional. The rivalry intensified when critics praised the realism of the fight scenes, giving much of the credit to Wolf's precision and physical mastery. Infante, known for his insecurity despite his fame, could not stand the comparisons. There were even rumors that off-camera, the two men nearly came to blows for real after arguing over the choreography of the punches. In the end, Pepe El Toro cemented both their legacies. Infante as the tragic hero, Rubinskis as the perfect villain. But for Pedro, the wound of having been overshadowed by a foreign boxer turned movie star never quite healed. Pedro Infante's list surprised everyone. 6 names he never forgave. But the question remains, do you think anyone else should have been on that list? Or maybe some didn't deserve to be there? Tell me in the comments, give it a like and share this video with anyone who still remembers his voice. Do you want me to put together an extended version with a more dramatic conclusion that connects Pedro with the idea of betrayals, rivalries and a tragic destiny marked by those 6 names?